Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. As a divorced mom of 3 now grown kids, I have firsthand experience in life taking some turns I didn't expect. The thing about divorce is that you have the opportunity to start over. You have a next chapter. Today's show is titled, Who Am I Now? Navigating Identity and Work After Divorce. Sometimes people going through divorce feel so stuck in the fear and overwhelm that they overlook the very real opportunity to redesign their identity. Life is a journey, and our mindset is a choice. Today's guest, Melissa Schwartzman, is a therapist, divorce coach, and mediator, and she's here to help us navigate post-divorce identity. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm going to start and give the audience a little bit about Melissa before we go deep into the conversation. So, Melissa is a licensed clinical social worker who has practiced 25 years in New York and New Jersey. She holds a master's in social work from NYU and a master's in organizational psychology from Columbia. In addition, Melissa has training in couples therapy from the Ackerman Institute, as well as training in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, from the Training Institute for Mental Health. Her specialty is working with couples to strengthen their relationships, but she also saw the natural link toward divorce support and became a divorce coach and now a professional divorce mediator. She helps couples work through the challenges of divorce in a collaborative, peaceful way, guiding them toward fair and peaceful resolutions. When she works with individuals as a divorce coach, she helps them make positive changes to overcome what's holding them back from achieving their real personal goals. In fact, she helps them discover their personal goals. Melissa works with individuals to navigate the overwhelming decisions surrounding separation, personal growth, and new beginnings. So, Melissa, I always open my show with the same question. What's your story and what led you to the work you do now?
Absolutely. So I began my journey. I was working in a corporate career in human resources, but always so interested in human dynamics and behavior as a psychology major undergrad that I actually went to school full time and left my corporate job to become an acting therapist. And
Amazing.
as we talked about, life takes all different journeys and turns. And I found myself, I finished my clinical training. And then I had a personal situation, which was I was going to be getting divorced. And I had a choice. Am I going to pursue my passion, the schooling I just completed? Or I had some practical decisions to make, such as how am I going to make sure that I had a 1-year-old daughter at the time, how we were going to support each other and move on. So I went back to work in HR, which is why I often focus on career often with people that I'm coaching, because it's an opportunity to see what you need to do about that. But now I have found later on in life that I'm able to come back to my passion, utilize what I've done from an HR perspective. And in my therapy practice, as Lisa mentioned, is very focused on couples and relationships. And there was born my natural tendency to want to help people that might not be staying together in their relationships. And I was helping them with their parenting plans, equitable distribution. And I said, you know what? I better really know what I'm doing here if I'm going to be this lifeline for everybody. So that's how I went back and started the expansion from my therapy practice to be able to kind of be able to lend that divorce support, whether it's through um, doing the mediation, the coaching, or I also help with some people who are having trouble with their relationship post divorce as co-parents, get them on track.
Amazing. Amazing. So that's like the trifecta here, right? You do all sorts of modalities that get to the heart of what people really need when they're going through big life transitions like divorce. So the topic today is who am I now? navigating identity and work after divorce. So why don't you share a little bit about why divorce disrupts our career identity and how that's normal?
Absolutely. Well, anybody who's been through a divorce, and I have personally, as I stated, knows that you have all these new questions to ask yourself. You feel emotionally like, how are you going to move forward? But some people had been working in a career for a long time and need to make changes. And some people may have been a homemaker and handing to children and saying, well, now that I'm getting divorced, I have to do something different. So we all know that upheaval can be really, really, really unstable for each of us. And so I think it's important to really go back and assess, not just jump in, okay, I'm going to go get a job now, get my resume ready. We need to take a step back and be able to think about thoughtfully, what do you want to be doing? And then sometimes the practical can we afford to do what we can afford to do? But I think as I see it, and as I working with all the people that I work with, view divorce as a chance that you can have a transformation, a new start. And often people find that their professional identity has taken a back seat to something, or their professional identity was the sole purpose, but now they might need to be shifting that. So to be more concise about it, I think it's really important to look at all the orbits that are going on, and I really help people kind of hone in on what is that going to mean for them professionally.
Okay, so let's go back because we had a little bit of a fuzz in your internet. So if you could repeat that last thing that you just said.
Oh, I was just saying it's really important to make sure that each person's thinking about thoughtfully what they want to do for themselves, and take a step back.
So what you're really saying is that divorce gives you the opportunity to do a little pause. And instead of rushing into going back to the thing I used to do or rushing out of, I don't have an identity anymore because my identity was solely my work or my parenting or my being a wife or husband, you're saying, let's pause. Let's do a little values clarification, see what you really want and need, and then move forward. Then we can redesign your resume if that's what we need to do. Then we can re-experience who you are in your new clothing, right? The clothing of a divorced person. So that sounds like a
Absolutely.
yeah, that sounds like a really
Yeah,
helpful guiding principle.
it's
So
very important not to rush into anything.
yeah, absolutely. So speaking of rushing, what about not rushing? What about feeling frozen? So we know that when you've had a divorce, you're experiencing lots of grief and you're grieving the life that you used to have, you're grieving your dreams for the future, and maybe there is some grief involved with your career and confusion about what being a divorced person means for that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to accept that there's going to be a lot of different feelings. We all know the stages of grief, right? Denial, anger. These things happen with all the things that you're experiencing. So, in terms of the career perspective, it's really important if you're feeling stuck to think about what that might be. Is it because now you were able to really focus on your work, but now that you're sharing parenting time, are you rushing to get children to be picked up, or are you really distracted? Or was it that you were feeling trapped in so many ways in your life that now you're having this additional emotional burden and now you have to say, okay, why am I feeling so blocked? I think it's important for anyone going through this to really think about what has changed for them. And I think there's a period of time, right, where people have to process this to be able to accept what's going to be changing and what's going to be new. And then I love to use it as a powerful pivot to really go back inside and say, well, what are the things I want for me? I think this is an important time to reclaim yourself. But if you're saying you're feeling really stuck, I think it's important to get the support you need to really process what is immobilizing you, and then to kind of get to the root of what would inspire and motivate you once again.
Right. But people often feel like nothing inspires them. When they're in that dark space of feeling stuck, They might feel like there's no inspiration. They can feel really depressed, and depressed leads to inaction. Depression can lead to inaction. And maybe they are now not performing the way that they feel is up to what their real caliber is. So now they're worried about what's going to happen with regard to their job. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, how do you get people to sort of look at themselves in a different way? So, or give themselves a little bit of grace for this moment that they're going through.
Yes, I think that's really important. And that was what we were kind of talking about before, where you don't want to rush into anything. You really want to make sure that you're all around holistically helping yourself. So, some things to do in that way is to help people if they're saying that they're not any feeling any sense of feel goodness or purpose every day, we have to remind them about how they do have that within themselves. And I think it's important to ask them key questions. Right now you might be feeling this way, but what are some things that might have really helped you feel motivated in the past? Or if you think about something from a blank slate perspective, what are some things that you might want to think about doing differently now? I think it's a matter of starting first to get people feeling grounded and stable and being able to maybe think about what has stopped them by asking them some questions to generate what could help them feel better. And sometimes, even though we're talking about how this relates to career, it's really important to make sure that people feel like they are getting on in terms of some sort of routine, something that's helping them build that structure. And then it might be just having them do some of their daily living things, and then we can build from there and start talking about what can you do for yourself on a professional level. But sometimes it takes some time just to be in the space.
Right. And it's about giving yourself permission. Like, you don't need to make all the decisions all at once. And so if your identity has like all of a sudden transformed from being a stay-at-home mom or having a career as a high-powered executive, and all of a sudden you feel like you can't do those things anymore because you're feeling the grief, like acknowledging that that's a natural, normal human response. And maybe it's there, get a little curious. Maybe that response is there to tell you, like, you need to take that time, right? You need to
Ah,
take that time to reframe. So sometimes I ask my clients, so what makes you curious about the way you're feeling right now? Or how could you be curious? Because you know what, our bodies and our emotions, they're there to tell us things and give us messages. So, that's where I think also with the career pivot, it's like, I don't have to do everything at once. Why do I feel so motivated to like make a big change? What is going on for me? So tell me more about like some of the experiences you've had with clients about, when they say, I don't feel like I like to do anything anymore. Like, how do you help them shift?
right. Well, I think it's really important. All the things that you're saying is that we have to really be giving ourselves some pause and some grace to be able to kind of process all these new changes with the intention and goal, right, that we want to get people set up for success. So I think it's important to take small steps. You don't want to jump into everything. So when I work with different people, let's say that we have somebody who's always been really a stay-at-home mom. And now they feel like they have all these additional responsibilities that they have, maybe to have more of a financial role, or maybe their kids also were growing older at the same time. And now, this loss that we were saying of not being married in this family unit, and now maybe the loss of the children growing to do different things. So I think it's important to really listen to what these changes are, the impacts that they're having, and then we can craft around that to say, well, if you're really feeling that these changes are feeling that they're not stable for you, we need to think about what's going to make you grounded. So instead of saying, okay, well, if you're going to need to go back into the workforce right away, because I've had several women who've had to do this, that can be so overwhelming. People sometimes haven't even dressed for work in like ages, right? What is being a working person? So I think it's incremental steps, giving yourself the patience to feel what's happening for you, make informed decisions as you're doing that. So if somebody's not had a resume for years, we're not going to say, okay, go, put that all together at once. we're going to reflect on what were your experiences when you were working? What can you think about led you to having that gap? And how can you think about some of the things you might have liked to do before or different? Maybe somebody who's been at home for so long, and used to maybe work in finance, maybe they said, well, I'm not so sure I want to do that anymore. And then I have a key questions that I ask people about their career to kind of pinpoint some of their strengths that would be leaning towards doing one thing or another. And sometimes people need to be able to think about what were their challenges before, because that could become an additional obstacle. Maybe they did have a performance issue at work while they were going through the divorce, and now I'm shifting to people who were in work now and maybe need to think about choices they need to make differently. Maybe they really need to rethink about their brand and some of the things that they need to fix first before they can think about what is my absolute next step going to be. And then sometimes people have said, I want to switch completely. I want to give back and do something to people who have had a similar situation. And we see this often, right, in the divorce professionals network. Some people say, you know what? I want a different meaning for my life because I feel so low and so stuck. I want to use that cause for good. I want to be able to go and help people who've been doing something similar. So I've had some people who say, I really want to be more altruistic and give back and help. But in the end, the most important thing is you cannot change your life completely all at once. And the more time you spend reflecting, being real with your feelings, and then figuring out what the next step is will really be beneficial in the end.
So we're going to take a quick break right now to hear from our sponsor. When we get back, we're going to talk about the coaching process from stuck to strategy. So we'll be back with Melissa Schwartzman right after the break. And we're back with Melissa Schwartzman, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She's a divorce coach. She worked in HR for over 20 years, and now she's here to share with us tools for rediscovering who am I now, navigating identity and work after divorce. So, the coaching process from stuck to strategy. You often say that you help clients rebuild from the inside out. They find their identity, their purpose, and then we develop a practical direction. So, what does that look like? What are the steps that people can take?
Absolutely. So I think it's a lot about reflecting on past things that had worked successfully and some of the challenges that might have been ongoing. And then say, what do I want to do with the experiences I've had previously? And how can I work on making a better choices in the future? We've talked a lot about sometimes we don't know what we want to do. So, how do we really hone in on what that's going to look like? And I think it's really digging deeper to think about what are the things that you've felt that you've had to do in the workplace that maybe weren't as exciting, and what are the things that you've really wanted to pursue but maybe never took time to do that. And so it's really important to also figure out what is your goal in the short term and what your goal is in the long term. Because sometimes, let's say we want to maybe do something different. Let's say we're going back, we've had a very analytical corporate role, very high level, but now we want to take a step back and do something where we're going to do maybe our own self employed business or something like that. We need to make sure that we don't rush into anything and take a big leap. We need to say, okay, well, the first thing I would need to do is maybe there's additional training I need to take. And then maybe there's some practical work that I have to do. But it's really important to say to yourself, I have key characteristics that I really think are my strengths. I've had something I've wanted to do and pursue. And the other piece of that is, what about, we talk about when saying, what if I can't do it? What if I want to do all these things, but I don't have it within them? So I think that's really important with the career coaching, is to make sure that people really are feeling good about themselves, what they can accomplish, and making sure that they aren't getting held back. So when I do my coaching, we set out our goals from the beginning. And we always say we can come back and modify them. And we have progress check ins. And we need to realize that sometimes if you set a goal for yourself, either going back to the workplace, switching a career, or just feeling like you're going to do something part time, you really need to make sure that you're assessing each and every day about what's going right, what's maybe not going so right. And we take an assessment every day that we meet to see if we're meeting those goals.
Got
Now,
it.
one last thing is it's really important to call out strengths continuously to keep the motivation strong.
That sounds really powerful. So, one thing that I've been thinking about, Melissa, is that sometimes, like, let's say you are in a job and now you have more childcare responsibilities, or now you have fewer childcare responsibilities, because we also know that whether women are working full time or not, they still are responsible for the bulk of the childcare responsibilities. That's something that, statistics show that it doesn't matter. Women still have the bulk of that job. So what if someone really can't leave their job but needs to redesign it, or or dig back into, like, what about the job do they like, and how can they maybe lift that? Like, how do you help people redesign the situation they're in without taking the leap out of that role or job?
That, that makes total sense. The word I always use is balance, right?
Okay.
P- People are going to need to find a balance. How are you going to manage additional responsibilities like you mentioned? Maybe your work hours need to change. So you need to be able to find out if you can craft a different way to manage your work day. So maybe you have to start a little later because you have a drop off, or maybe you have to leave a little earlier for pickup. But I think it's important to then say, okay, well, maybe after I get my kids settled back at home in the afternoon, I can schedule more meetings at that time. If they're not self-sufficient and your kids require that they need the time, it's important to think about what resources do you need to be able to make things possible for you, and not to be shy about advocating for yourself about what that is. Now, in corporate environments, sometimes that could be more tricky, but I think if you're willing to come forward, we have a recommendation to make, then people are more inclined to have better results at work. Now, on the other side, now, wow, I don't have my kids as often, and like I can have more time to do things within my career. Maybe it's like, wow, I really thought of always going for that promotion, or maybe I wanted to work in sales instead of working in the finance department. And maybe now I can start crafting a plan to do a shift, to do a over to a new job. But I think what it is not saying I'm going to do one thing for sure right away, but thinking about doing incremental steps that help you to lead to that ultimate goal. And flexibility is my other word with the balance. You have to make sure that maybe you tried one thing with a morning routine to getting your kids off, and that didn't work. So you can't get discouraged. You have to keep trying. But I think it's also reassessing with yourself all the time what's going well, what's not, new plans formulated.
Right. So that's where um, you're collecting data from each one of your experiences, and there could be data that shows that this new system works, and there could be data that shows that, okay, this one is not quite working. I need to try something else. And what I originally brought up was the idea that sometimes people feel like they have to make big changes, and we know that during life transformations, that might be the or uh, not just life transformations, but really hard experiences in life that are dysregulating, that's not the best time to make a big move. So, how do you make the space that you're in comfortable until you're ready to actually make the move?
I think that's a great point because not everything can change all at once when you're going through so many changes. So I think it's important to make sure that you get comfortable with some of the things that are your bookends, so to speak, right? What needs to stay in place? We gave an example about now if you're more involved with childcare before and after work, or maybe even sometimes things that are happening during the workday. I think it's important to say, okay, well, I'm going to need to make some changes to adapt with that. But maybe that's not a forever thing, right? I could still, in a simultaneous way, be planning for things in the future.
Hmm.
And I think that it's just important to give yourself a lot of grace with everything that's going on. And I think sometimes what I work with clients is accepting the situation, because sometimes when you have to do these bends and shifts, but you haven't really gotten comfortable with the reality of it, and you're still having so much energy that might be really negative. Like, I'm only having to do this because, somebody walked out on me, or I only had to do this because this other person was never able to be there to do these things. So there's a lot of emotional gravity going on at the same time that we're making practical daily life choices. So it really is, I think small steps are better than big leaps, because you need to get used to what you're doing in increments.
Right. And this is really following the um, philosophy of the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And I read this book a couple years ago, and it really shifted everything for me, because when you want to make a change, you sort of see like, I need to have the big change and it's down the road and it's like giant. But what he shares and what you just shared is that it's the incremental changes that we stack that make the most difference, because it's much easier to make a small change than to make a dramatic change. And so when we're thinking about our careers, sometimes we just want to cut bait and totally drop everything. And taking it from someone who actually did that a few years ago so that I could become a divorce coach, sometimes it works out, but sometimes you need a little more planning. And that's where you could say, all right, this is the habit or the activity in my work that I like the most. I'm going to lean into this and see what happens. And that's the kind of like practical step that you can take. That's small, and it will help you move forward, because if you find success there, then that's data and you can keep moving forward. And if you don't find success there, that's also data that can help you figure out what the next move is. So
100%.
yeah, so that's what I just wanted to add that little bit in. So, what do you think are some practical first steps for listeners who may feel stuck in their jobs and need something new to move them forward? Some little step.
Sure. With the small step philosophy, I think if you're feeling stuck in your job, I think it's important to think about anything that you really think that brings you joy about it, and maybe see if there's an opportunity to maximize focusing on that. So maybe if you're in a job where you're in meetings all the time, but that's not something that you enjoy, and you enjoy maybe cultivating relationships more outside the meeting schedule, or if you enjoy doing something different within your role, that maybe you can showcase something to your team. So I think it's really important to also blend, if you have something that you don't love to do, making sure you couple it with something that you do enjoy doing. So it's kind of finding the very positive things that you have going on. And then the motivation, if we are saying in an incremental way, we might have medium and longer term goals that we kind of keep them in a motivation way. So we say, okay, if I do this now, then I'm going to be able to do it, sort of like giving yourself a reward if you kind of can stay where you are. But it really is important, I think, also when we're talking about the workplace, whether it be something we're actually going into the corporate environment, or we're doing something remotely at home. I think making sure that you feel like you have support from different people, whether it's when you're at work or engaging with people at work, or if you're self-employed, making sure you're networking with colleagues. I think that helps you sometimes refresh when you're feeling a bit stuck.
Yeah, I think that that's right. But I also am wondering, are there habits that people can start that are a little bit different? Like, can we encourage our audience to, like, maybe this is the time to journal? Like, what's different about you now? What
Right.
what are those three things that made you feel like you were most in your professional zone? What are three moments in your past roles when you felt most alive, and what do they have in common? You know, that's where, you have given advice to that effect. So what are a couple more things? Like for me and my clients, I always say write it down, because when you start articulating, that's the beginning of making real changes, because that's the beginning of creating new awareness. So what else could people do to like create some new awarenesses?
Yeah, I think it's important to really think about what's going on for them as they're having different experiences and really saying, okay, what is happening for me in the moment and what is changing for me? What about is it interacting with people? Am I feeling because a lot of emotional changes are happening for me? Am I having a really hard time interacting with people when I really might want to crawl in a hole right now or doing things of that nature? So I think it's important to be really self-aware so that you can kind of think about what you can do as a result of the feelings that you're managing. So if you're writing down every day a couple things that you wanted to focus on in terms of what didn't feel right that day, and then think about what a solution could be the next day, because I always try to say, like, there's always a chance to start fresh tomorrow, right, if you didn't have a good day. So I also find that sometimes people get really caught up in the things that aren't going well. So I like to encourage people to kind of have a success list that they have, then they can look at it and they can also tell people loud and proud, these are things that I've done in the past that have really been a success for me, and remind yourself that you're capable of doing that. I think there's a lot of self-talk often involved, right, when you're making these big changes. So I think it's really important to remember what went well and what have been some setbacks and how you've dealt with them. So I think reminders and reflection are very important.
That's great. And I can see that being something that we write down, like having a reminder, like, look, I was successful in this. I can continue to be successful in this. I have some new obstacles. So how am I going to get around those obstacles? And one thing that resonated with me with this last conversation is that humans have a negativity bias. Like we tend to remember the things that don't go right over the things that do go right. So it takes more effort to create that success journal than to create a this went wrong, this went wrong, this went wrong, this went wrong. So what I reiterate or compliment you on this idea that a success journal or a skills journal, what are my best skills? And just start writing them down. And then maybe do checkoffs when you actually are able to activate those skills. Like, I'm really good at deflecting insults. Let's say that's a thing. So maybe you're not really good. Maybe you're actually writing that down because you hope to be really good. So the first time that you are successful at that, you do a little check mark. I deflected a couple of insults and that made me feel a little bit stronger, a little bit more grounded. Does that seem like it's a tool that could really move people forward?
I think it sounds amazing because then you're constantly giving yourself more confidence and saying, I got this, I can do it. This is really something that I've done before, and really propel people in a really positive way.
You know, I've listened to Mel Robbins, and she said to me once, or not to me, she said to her audience, um, confidence is a habit. It's not like you're born with confidence. It's a practice. You have to practice doing it. And all of us have the capacity to do it. We just don't always feel like it's there for us right now. So that's a new skill. That's about reinvention. It's like it's a strength, but it's only a strength when we practice it. And so for all of our listeners, I want you to be sure that these are about practices. They're small, they're incremental, but with each small change you make consistently, a big change is lurking on the horizon. So, so Melissa, we're about the end of our time. So, can you share with people how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So you can find me Melissa Beth Counseling on the web, and you can find me on Melissa Beth Counseling at gmail.com for my email, as well as on Instagram, Melissa Beth Counseling Mediation.
That's wonderful. So, thank you so much, Melissa. This has been great. We've gotten great tools for how to navigate your identity and your job after divorce. For my audience, you can find me at Lisa at lzlcoaching.com. And my website is www.lzlcoaching.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.